Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down to ask a very important question. We're starting off the week hot. Did Bethesda lie about Starfield? You see, a lot of the community is split on the exploration for Starfield. Many people expected more of the Fallout, Elder Scrolls style exploration on foot, wandering from location to location. But Starfield, if you've played it, you know it's very different. Now, that doesn't make it bad. Many people like it, but there are pitfalls, like a lot of fast traveling is involved, and sometimes the space exploration isn't what you would hope it would be. So what I did, as someone who has covered Starfield since it was very much a trademark up until this point in time, is I went through all the receipts. What did Bethesda say about Starfield's exploration? And what really amplified some people's disappointment with the exploration were two particular videos that have done quite well and bring up a lot of great points. I'm going to be talking about Alana Pierce's video where she spent 7 hours flying to Pluto, which is awesome. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about a section of Luke Stevens' review on procedural content on these planets and what was promised with our exploration in Starfield, and lining up with his stuff where I actually made a pretty fun discovery. Both these videos are fantastic. I'll have them linked down below. Check them out if you haven't seen them. But ladies and gentlemen, today we're answering a pretty important question, also given the fact that many people feel that Bethesda has a history of lying to their consumers. So we'll see if they did so this time around with Starfield. If you're new here, you're into Starfield news, conversations, discussions, breakdowns, all that fun stuff, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. That final review is on the way. I delayed it from last week because I still had a couple more quests to do into this week. It should be out within a couple of days, so I'm really looking forward to sharing my final thoughts with the game. So let's talk about Starfield, shall we? Let's start off with going through a quote on just how many planets are in the game Todd Howard said during the 2022 Direct, and if it's true. You may be wondering just how big this game is. Howard answers his own question, starting on just one planet. You can land into Atlantis, he explains, but you can also land and explore anywhere on the planet. And it's not just this planet, it's all the planets in the system, from barren but resource-heavy ice balls to Goldilocks planets with life. And it's not just this system, but over 100 systems, over 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore. We can't wait to see what you find. Which is true. There's definitely a lot of emptiness in Starfield, and whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is not really what I'm looking to discuss today. But every planet, even if it's a completely empty one with nothing there, it can be frustrating sometimes when you're looking for something on that planet and you're trying to find content, but these planets all can be landed on. So in that point, it was true. Here's where things get a little bit muddied, because then you get a quote like this in Todd Howard's interview with the Washington Post, where he says, "It's like Skyrim in space." That's how Bethesda Game Studios executive producer Todd Howard described the upcoming game Starfield in an exclusive video interview with the Washington Post. Now, I know we all have different ways of approaching Skyrim, but I think we can all agree that if you've played Skyrim and you've explored the world of Skyrim, and then you play Starfield and you explore even a planet of Starfield, I'm not talking quality here, I'm talking how you explore. I wouldn't consider this game Skyrim in space. I would really consider it Oblivion or Daggerfall in space personally, and I feel like this was a really inaccurate description of the experience. Especially because this is where people started to connect the dots and believe the words of Bethesda and think, well, space exploration in Starfield should be kind of that big openness like Skyrim, right? That sense of freedom, go anywhere. And so that's what Alana Pierce kind of tested. Can you fly to these planets? Because otherwise, when you're in space, I found Starfield's space exploration to oftentimes be lackluster because it felt like you were opening up an interactive menu and just going from loading screen to loading screen. And oftentimes it was best just to go to your mission menu and fast travel to where you needed to go to skip at least an additional loading screen. It would save you more time that way, where sometimes space exploration became null. So what she did was she's decided to live stream, hey, I'm gonna fly all the way to Pluto. And she got there. And if you haven't seen the video, what happens is it turns out it is actually a sphere. It's not a PNG. You can fly inside it, and these spheres are actually rotating around the sun. And what's happening is there's a light side and a dark side, as I've highlighted in a video before. So all the tech is actually working as Bethesda broke it down. And I know many people are wise enough to know that this wasn't going to be a No Man's Sky experience where you fly to the planet and it transitions in real time and you can land on the planet. It was very much depicted, even in the 2023 Direct, that you would pretty much go through a series of animations to get on a planet. And that form of exploration is very different. In any other Bethesda Game Studios game, I think the fair expectation based off what they've built for years and years and years is that I could take my ship and fly towards that planet, and at least there would be an automatic transition, but the game doesn't expect you to do what Alana did. And Todd kind of talked a bit about how exploration is different. a number of months ago on the Lex Friedman podcast. Here's what he had to say.
And Daggerfall actually was a touchstone for us going into Starfield for how we do the planets, because there's a different kind of gameplay experience when you just wander outside a city in Daggerfall than, follow a quest line and go to this place, and it's completely handcrafted, and everything around every corner we've kind of placed like Skyrim. Starfield's a bit more like Daggerfall, and if you wander outside the city, we're going to be generating things, and you kind of get used to that game flow, different than we've done before, and fun in a different kind of way.
Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I would call an apt description of the Starfield experience, how he draws the line between Daggerfall and Starfield. The problem is, and this will continue to be an issue, a lot of this information that really describes Starfield well is typically not in official marketing material. It's tucked away in an interview the week before the game comes out. We'll get to that in a moment. Or it's here in the Lex Friedman podcast. It's not being broadcast to fans and continuously a part of the game's marketing message. Perhaps more deeper into that subject is seamless space travel is not that important to Starfield players, says Todd Howard. When asked whether players can fly seamlessly to space, Howard said the feature is really not just that important to the player to justify the extra engineering work required. People have said, can you fly the ship straight down to the planet? No, we decided early in the project that the on-surface is one reality, and when you're in space, it's another reality. So, disappointing, yes, in my opinion. Maybe you disagree, and that's fine. But it is what they said it was going to be. I do think when we heard it was going to be another reality in space, you're totally right, and I think I'm totally right to believe that we were expecting something on the level of each system was explorable, a la Mass Effect 2, where you could kind of go around and, oh, wait, what's that floating space station out there? What's on this planet here? And maybe expect a little bit more handcrafted content. That's another thing that Bethesda promised that I don't really think you can quantify as I play the game more and more is, hey, this feels like there's more handcrafted content than ever before. I think my quest log is a good one to go by, but I spent 300 hours in my first playthrough of Skyrim. We know most of that, barring the Radiant quest lines like in, say, the Thieves Guild, is handcrafted. However, I think the problem with Bethesda's communication is that some of the clarity came way too late in the cycle. What I mean by this is GQ did a preview when I had my review code in hand and I was playing Starfield, and I was like, I want to say what's going on here, but obviously I couldn't. But this quote here really stood out to me, because if you watched my impressions, and you'll see it in my review, I'll spoil that much. Yeah, I had a problem with how exploration was handled in Starfield. I mean, this video kind of confirms it too, right? And here's what Todd had to say. Howard admits he's not sure whether everyone will like the change in rhythm. It's not the same as dropping you in a world like Skyrim, he says. You wander totally differently. But it's in those moments of wandering where the game can be the most empty and the most beautiful. All of the tech and art comes to fruition when I land on a distant world and step out of my ship. I think that moment works almost every time, Howard says. And I think this is where the community starts to collide a bit and go, oh, did they lie? Didn't they lie? I can't really tell. Because in one instance, they said it's Skyrim in space, which I just personally think is a very inaccurate description from the way conversations are handled all the way to how you go from place to place to even the tech backing the game and how it's utilized. Just screams, again, Daggerfall and Oblivion to me, clear as day. It just seems like Skyrim in space is a really good marketing term. Whereas here he goes, it's not like being dropped in a world like Skyrim. It's very different. And quite frankly, I don't know if people are going to like that. I think this first, or really just wiping Skyrim in space off the map as a marketing term, would have done them the biggest favor here, because I think this would have prepared people for a different rhythm. Because when I first started playing it, I'm like, this is different from a BGS game through and through. And what Starfield is mostly filled with is procedural tech, which is something that Luke Stevens' review did get into, and we'll highlight that now after this quote, where Todd does say, we do a lot of procedural generation in Starfield, but I would keep in mind that we've always done that. It's a big part of Skyrim in the terms of questing and some other things that we do. We generate landscape using procedural systems, so we've always kind of worked on it. The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall is one that we look at a lot in the terms of game flow, and we had been developing some procedural technology and doing some prototypes, and it really started to come to a head with Starfield in that we think we can do this. I should also note that we've done more handcrafting in this game content-wise than any game we've done. We're at over 200,000 lines of dialogue, so we still do a lot of handcrafting, and if people just want to do what they're used to in our games and follow a main quest and do the quest lines, you're going to see what you kind of expect from us. But then you have this whole other part. Well, I'm just going to wander this planet, and I'm going to provide some gameplay and some random content and those kinds of things. Kind of like Daggerfall would if you go way back. So I think this is an accurate description of the game. I think the big sticking point is Skyrim in space, and I think the way Todd Howard describes it, although he doesn't fully say it here, it feels like he's leaning into the idea of it's almost like 2 games in one, I think is fair. I think Starfield is very much a split experience down the middle that feels like 2 games put together with its exploration and its crafting focus and how they just, again, feel like 2 entirely different worlds or universes really and coming together. But this focus on procedural tech, when they say here that, oh, you can kind of go ahead and just do the quest lines like you would and play these games like you would in our games, I think everyone has a different interpretation of that, but I think we all come together in that you will go and wander to your quest and maybe see something in the distance and go do that and then veer back to your quest. And Starfield is missing that entirely, which does hurt the game in my opinion. However, I think if the procedural tech was more fun to engage with, or if there was more handcrafted content, which I know is probably already asking for a lot, I think this would have ameliorated the issue at hand. So one thing that Luke Stevens pointed out in his review, I'll actually let him speak for himself. Let him show off the abandoned cryo lab.
There was also this science lab that I found sitting next to a swampy pool of poisonous gas, and I thought it was pretty cool looking, so I made a note of it to praise how cool it was that they dynamically placed this science lab studying toxic elements next to this toxic pool on this planet that just so happened to have a lot of toxic elements. However, just 2 hours and 15 minutes in-game later, I encountered the exact same thing on a different planet as part of a main story mission. The exact same poison bog and the exact same building with precisely the same enemy placement, but this time it was part of a main story mission instead of a dynamically placed encounter.
Now, funny enough, I was capturing gameplay for this very video, just preparing, doing some extra exploration on the side, making sure I could highlight things I wanted to visually display, and I came across the exact same abandoned cryo lab with the exact same layout, except for me, it was the Crimson Fleet. It was a little bit of a cool encounter there because I finished that quest line and I'm allied with them, so they didn't attack me at all. But it was the same exact place, the same exact layout. Person walked out towards the crate, same encounter. And that is where I feel like procedural should be at its best because it's different for all of us. And when I see the exact same layout and setup and encounter that Luke had, who put time into the game and played it in a completely different planet, maybe in a totally different system too. That is where it feels like the procedural tech has failed us. So to answer the question, did Bethesda lie? I don't really think entirely. I just think we had wildly different expectations based off what they were saying. And I don't think we're wrong for that. There is always a studio DNA packed into the games, which is why we come to love certain companies. This may sound like an off-the-wall example, but I love DICE because of Battlefield 3, right? That was the game that really brought me into the fold of why I thought DICE was a special talent. But when you play something like Star Wars Battlefront 2, and you stripped out all of the microtransactions, you get the version you have nowadays, you can still feel it's a DICE video game, right? There's a DICE DNA in there, which makes it special, which makes it unique. And you think the same thing with Bethesda Game Studios. Yes, Fallout and Elder Scrolls have their own defining qualities. However, there are things that are shared between the two because it's a Bethesda Game Studios game. So you would not be wrong to expect in another IP, by the way, if already 2 of them share these elements, that in IP3, that you'd find more of that in Starfield. And so I think no one's wrong for the expectations that they had actually created based off what was said here. I think it was wrong to say it's Skyrim in space, and it looks like there was a course correction there where they really started to lean more into Daggerfall, not as much into Oblivion as I personally would have, and I get that because that's marketing, but that doesn't make it right. Like, I get it would sell the product more, but that doesn't make it right because I feel like if I were to come up to you and say, buy Starfield, it's Skyrim in space, I feel like I'm selling to you a totally different experience in your head. I do think Todd Howard was incorrect about seamless space exploration. Again, I think when we all imagined what he was talking about, and I don't know if we should blame ourselves for this one entirely, I think when he was talking about, yeah, it's not important because we have one reality on ground and one reality in space, we were thinking that there would be space exploration. Again, I would connect it to Mass Effect 2, and then on the ground would be like Mass Effect 1. But I'd say you got the Mass Effect 1 experience, but you didn't get the 2 experience. In fact, when you were in space, it again felt more like an interactive menu with fast traveling, which is not what people were looking for. Again, I understand what the game's trying to be, which is an RPG about interacting with all these people around the galaxy and having that needle in a haystack moment. I get what it's going for, but I'm also looking at what was said to the potential purchaser, where I think some things could easily have been conflated, and Bethesda could have done a better job communicating things. And I remember distinctly asking Bethesda for clarification on how procedural tech would be used, because what I saw in the Starfield Direct confused me. And I was open about that throughout multiple videos here on this channel. I was like, I don't know if we're all going to have different experiences on different worlds. And you start to see how Bethesda goes in the direction of, oh yes, it's going to be different for you versus someone else. And then I see myself and Luke overlapping with the same exact lab, and it's, you know, you can only expect so much variety. I think that's fair in Bethesda's defense, but that's where I think Starfield defeats itself. And you look at it as sort of this, if we went smaller, none of this probably would have been an issue at all. And I think that is the Achilles heel of Starfield. But did Bethesda lie? Ultimately, I think they were a little too protective of what the gameplay loop beat for beat was. They showed us it. I'll talk about the Direct in a moment, but explaining it, the feel, the rhythm, the flow, with it being so drastically different, where Bethesda Game Studios lovers such as myself were having a little bit of a tough time coming to grips with it, and maybe not even ending up liking it in some cases. I think that they should have been more open and transparent about what was different here. Would that have impacted sales? I think not, because many people have been calling for Bethesda to evolve and change things up. This probably could have helped them. I think when you go back to the Starfield Direct, you'll see that they showed every nook and cranny of the game. Bethesda was very open about that, and it was just trying to define what you were seeing. Now, with the benefit of hindsight 2020, you can look and go, oh, that's procedural. Oh, that is the way you would fly to a planet, select it, land on it. They show all of that. It's just we're not familiar enough with it to know what we're looking at and what the game flow is, what the game rhythm is, until you get your hands on it and properly understand it. So I think some things could have been conveyed better by Bethesda, but outside of Skyrim and space, I don't get the vibe here from everything they said to us that they were lying. I do think, though, that what Todd said to GQ, which was just about a week before reviews went live, I think it should have been said way sooner. That, like, you know, hey, it's a different vibe, it's a different rhythm. To me, tucking it in at the last second seems a little sneaky, like, hey, you know what, like, let's just put this kind of out there so it's out there, but it's not really widely circulated outside of, I think, my channel. I don't think many people really talked about that GQ preview. I think Juicehead did, but like not many people outside that Bethesda circle got that information, where that was the only time it was communicated. This is a different flow. So Bethesda didn't lie. I think they were a little sneaky. I think they were just a touch sneaky there. So this was a fun one to break down, and I'm curious as to your thoughts, because I think a lot of it comes down to interpretation, because what they were saying, I think we all had different ideas in our head of what that experience would be like. So do you feel like Bethesda was on the money with how they marketed the game or not? I think comparatively speaking to something like Fallout 4, I think Bethesda did a much better job here with Starfield, in that if you were just to watch the Direct and pay attention to a couple interviews, what you saw is what you got. But I think the way that experience translates into full-on gameplay, and you see how broken up it can be, is where it kind of hurts the game and a lot of criticism comes in. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts. Please do fire away. Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the heck out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.